Bienvenidos, Husham indeed, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from the CTS-130 Section 402 course running during the spring 2021 semester. This is the Cisco Networking Academy curriculum, and specifically the Introduction to Networks course, ITNv7, which is the first of the 3 CCNA Cisco Networking Academy courses. In this packet tracer activity and tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at a homegrown activity that's a skills activity, where you're now going to be challenged to provide the initial configuration and passwords for 2 switches. There are some other tasks we're going to do, so you'll learn how to do that. And remember that when performing the initial configuration, as we have done many times, I'm also going to show you some very helpful commands that you're going to want to apply to your router or switch. So let's dive in and take a look at this activity. And as you can see, it's a very simple activity. We simply have 2 switches connected together. Now, I also found it interesting that these are using a straight-through copper cable and working without issue, where in a previous activity, it really wanted that crossover cable connected. It wouldn't allow the ports to come up with the straight-through cable. So here are the objectives for our activity. Again, if you've done the previous activities from Chapter 2 or followed along in the videos, you should be good to go here, because this is simply reinforcing a lot of that work. So let's go ahead and dive in here. Now, the first thing it asks us to do is clear all configurations on both switches by removing the startup configuration file. Now, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. Remember, the startup configuration is held in non-volatile random access memory in NVRAM. So if I'm on the CLI here, and let's start off with switch number 1, and we're in user exec, we would enter the enable command to get to privilege exec, where I can say dir NVRAM. Now, I can simply say dir NVRAM, or if you put the colon at the end, you could also do that. Both commands will work. And as we can see, there is our startup configuration. Now, this is the configuration that the Cisco switch will use when it boots up. And in other words, if we were to go to a real Cisco switch, you can see here on distro switch 01, if I say dir NVRAM, what you might see, and again, if I pull the colon off, you'll notice that on a real Cisco switch, it doesn't work, right? We have to have the colon on there for that to work. But what you'll notice is there are many other files that exist in NVRAM. So maybe you want to delete just the startup configuration. And I'm going to show you 2 ways to approach this. The first is how we're going to do it here on the packet tracer activity. Now, remember, when I say write mem, that actually saves the running config and any changes that I've made since the last time the configuration was saved. It saves that to the startup config. Well, you can also say write erase. Now, write erase is going to erase the entire NVRAM file system and remove all configuration files that you might find in there. So I'm going to hit enter to confirm, and you can see erase of NVRAM is complete. So now when I say dir NVRAM colon, there are no files in the directory. So if you want to wipe out everything in the NVRAM, you can use the write memory command. However, what if you wanted to just pick off one file? Well, in packet tracer, we might have some challenges with this. So let's go to from user exec to privilege exec, and let's say dir NVRAM colon. And you can see here that there's my startup config. Now, you can actually delete a single file. And you can see here where you could say flash colon, but you'll notice there's no NVRAM there. But if I say dir flash colon, you can see that the startup config isn't in flash, right? So, but what if I said delete flash colon startup, and you can see it's not completing, right? So we're not going to be able to do that. And if I said delete NVRAM : startup config, and again, we're using packet tracer here, you can see that it's pretending as if, hey, this is going to work, and error deleting flash : /NVRAM. So it's going to come up and tell you no such file or directory. However, on a real Cisco device, if you were to say delete NVRAM : startup config, and you can see it completed the command for me, it's going to ask, are you sure you want to delete that? And that's what we're going to delete. And so I say yes. So now when I say dir NVRAM, you'll notice the startup config is there, but look at the size change, right? So it's really just a shell of the startup config. Now, if I really wanted to wipe everything out here, I would say write erase and click continue. And you can see that the NVRAM has been erased. You can think of it as maybe reinitialized or reformatted, because now when I say dir and look at the NVRAM, you can see here that the startup config size is 0. But again, the file, right, is actually here. There's sort of a shell, if you will. And if I was to save the running config to the startup config and then list out the NVRAM directory, you can see that we now have our startup config back here again. Again, it was empty here because we did the write erase. When I do a write memory, the file is back. And again, the reason it's still sort of sitting here is I haven't reloaded the device yet. But again, there would be an empty startup configuration if I had just erased everything. So now let's drop back over to the packet tracer activity, and we did our write erase on the other device. Let's do a, let's do a write erase here. And then again, if I said dir NVRAM with a colon, you'll notice that everything is gone. Now, you may have also noticed in the lower right-hand corner, the completion percentage was at 9% when we started the activity. It's now at 0%. And so now we're going to reload these devices. So we'll reload switch 2, and we'll say reload on switch 1. And what this is going to do is it's going to give us the switches with a blank configuration, right? So we'll be starting with a completely blank configuration on each of the switches. And we can tell in most part that that's what's happening here because we have the default prompt in user exec mode, which is simply switch with the greater than sign. If I look over on switch 2, we can see that it's the same there as well. All right, so here we are. Let's go ahead now and we're going to configure our host names. And it says see the topology labels for the correct host names. And those are simply going to be right up here, right? This is our diagram, our topology. So we'll go from user exec to privilege exec. We'll enter in, we'll get into global config, and then we'll enter in the host name. So the host name of switch 1 is simply S1. Now remember, we want to add in here the no IP domain lookup so that if we're in privilege exec and we happen to mistype a command, the switch does not try to resolve that command, that mistyped command, as a host name using DNS. So we say no IP domain lookup. So there's the host name. Let's create an encrypted privilege exec mode password of Cisco. And so we're going to say enable secret. Remember, the opposite of the secret here, or I should say the weaker of the two password options, is password. And we saw how you can crack the passwords very easily. So I'm going to say enable secret, and the password is simply Cisco. We're going to create line console access using the password of class on both switches as well. And again, I'm going to walk through switch 1 with a little bit more of an explanation, and then we'll go through switch 2 in a little quicker fashion. So let's get into line con 0, and we are going to set the password to class. Now remember, if I say do show run, and that do option allows me to run commands that you would typically run in privilege exec mode that would not run in global config or other sub-configuration modes. And you can see we have our password set here, but remember, we need to instruct the console line to present that password prompt at login when someone tries to log into the console port. Now, again, another value add command here is going to be logging synchronous, which we can also apply to the virtual terminal lines or the VTY lines. And logging synchronous is going to ensure that if for whatever reason we ran a command and it was producing log output to the console port, the console line, that at the end of that output of those messages, we would get our prompt back. And let me show you what that would look like. So here I am on this distro switch. Now there's 24 ports on this switch, and let's say show run and section line con. And so that's a tricky little command. I don't believe Packet Tracer is going to support this. But what I'm saying here, again, I'm filtering all of the show run output, right? Which is every port, every setting that we've got on the switch or the router that's in the running config. I'm sending it through this pipe, and that's kind of, think of the pipe as like a filter, maybe for your, your air system or your heating system or a water filter. It's going to get sent through that filter, and I'm saying here, show me the section that is line con, right? So just show me the line console section, because I only want to see that. And you can see we have logging synchronous here. And so let's go ahead, let's go into global config, let's go into line con 0, and I'm going to say no logging synchronous, because I want to show you what would happen without it on. So if I was to say interface range, fast Ethernet 0, 1 to 24, and that's all 24 ports on this is a 2960 switch. And now I'm going to say shut down. I'm going to shut all those ports down. And I want to run some more commands. So now I'm going to say do show run pipe it to section. And okay, well, you can see down over here in the lower right, well, there's where I left off. But what did I have before that? You'll notice I have no clue right now. And I'm hoping that it was do run, and I got the pipe right, and maybe the command would work. But this is what happens when logging synchronous is not turned on. And so if I start to backspace, take a look. It's removing the console output, the log message output. So I don't know what I just removed. I do know that here I'm back to my prompt, but I have to hit enter a few times to see that. And that can be very, very annoying, especially when you're working with ranges of interfaces or you're getting a lot of console messages that come up to the screen. Log messages that come to your console screen. So let's go back into line con 0 and let's say logging synchronous. And let's see what logging synchronous is going to buy us when it's turned on. So I'm going to go back into the interface range, fast Ethernet 0, 1 to 24, and I'm going to say no shut. In other words, I'm going to generate a whole bunch of console messages here indicating that I'm trying to bring these interfaces up. And as soon as I hit enter, I'm going to go ahead and start to type in a new command. All right, so here we go. No shut. I'm going to say do show run, and then I'm going to pipe that to section and line con. Now, you'll notice the output's still coming to the screen, but what do you notice once it's all done, or each time it stops sending something to the screen? It's giving me back my command line here that I'm trying to use. And so I can actually see what it was that I was doing, take a look at that and be like, yeah, I'm picking up right where I left off. Show me what the configuration is for the section, the configuration stanza that begins with line con 0. And that's what that command will do. So hopefully you've seen the value in that logging synchronous command. All right, so we're going to apply that here. Even though we may or may not need it, this is a very good thing to apply, very good setting to apply, irrespective of whether you think you might need it or not. All right, so we created, and let's say do show run and pipe it to section line con 0. And it actually did. Okay, great. Packet Tracer does support that command. So there's another filtering command. Remember, we've had include, INC, and now we have section. And so we've learned how to trim the output down to just that configuration stanza for line con 0. So everything looks good on the console line. Now let's go ahead on line VTY 0 to 15, all 15 of these at the same time. We're going to say password VTY class, and login is already there. Can't hurt to put it again. And why not? If we were SSH'd or telnetted in, we've got logging synchronous on as well. All right, so verify we've got the correct console. So how would we verify that? Well, I could say do show run section line VTY and take a look at that. It only shows me the section of the running config that contains VTY, line VTY configuration. If I wanted to see the console lines, again, I would say line con 0, because you typically only have a single console port on the device. And so those are two great shortcuts to put into your networking toolbox, or I should say your CLI, iOS CLI toolbox. All right, so that takes care of that configuration. On both switches, we're going to create a banner message. So we type exit to get back to global config, where we're going to say banner MOTD, and this is a super secret device. Log off now. Whoops, log off now. All right, so there is our banner message that we're going to, oh wait, and of course, it's actually asking for a specific message. I'm just thinking it wanted anything in there. It's probably going to be looking for this, authorized access only, exclamation mark, violators will be prosecuted. Make sure I spell that correctly. All right, so there is our banner message, and it looks like we may have received some points for that. Okay, so on switch 1, we're now going to configure that switched virtual interface. Remember, the SVI, that is going to be the virtual layer 3 interface on this switch. Now, just because I can create an SVI doesn't make the switch a layer 3 switch. The SVIs are available or can be created on layer 2 switches to allow management connectivity, right? If a switch is a multi-layer switch or a layer 3 switch, and layer 3 and multi-layer switch, those are synonymous terms here. If a switch was a multi-layer or a layer 3 switch, we're indicating or implying that it supports routing protocols. A switched virtual interface is not a routing protocol. It doesn't allow us to route traffic via this layer 2 switch. All it's allowing us to do is manage the layer 2 switch. And so that's what we're going to do here. So let's go ahead and say interface VLAN 1. Remember, we're not creating a VLAN. The VLAN already exists. VLAN 1 is the default VLAN. And it is the VLAN to which every port belongs, every physical port belongs, and this virtual port that we're creating belongs to by default. So we're going to say IP address 192.168.1.1, and it's a /24. Now remember, when I say /24, I'm referencing CIDR notation, classless interdomain routing notation. In dotted decimal format, the /24 would be 255.255.255.0. Now, it says enable the virtual interface. Remember, we need to say no shut. But let's take a look at a real Cisco switch as well. If I say do show IP interface brief, and I include the VL, you can see that this is the way that a real Cisco switch would appear. And here, the VLAN 1 is also administratively shut down. So remember, we would want to say no shut. Oh, sorry, I already did. We would want to say no shut on that real Cisco switch if the interface was shut down as well. So let's say do show run So give me the output of show run, all of that output. I'm going to send it through my little filter right here because I only want it to include what lines have a capital V followed by a lowercase l. And you can see it just shows interface VLAN 1. What about a do show IP interface brief and then include VL? And that's really what I wanted to run there previously so that I can see that the interface is up. All right, well, that is 50% complete. So you can imagine that when we go to switch 2 and we do this same thing, we're going to get another 50 points. But first, it's asking me to save my configuration. So how can I do that? Well, I could say copy running config to startup config. That's one way to do it. Or I could say write memory. That's another way to do it. So let's come to switch 2 and let's walk through things a little quicker here. Again, we go from user exec to privilege exec. We go into global config mode and we're going to say hostname S2 for switch 2. We're going to say no IP domain lookup. And then we're going to go ahead and create the enable password. So we're going to say enable secret, and the password is Cisco. We're going to go to the console line, line con 0, and we're going to enter in password of class. I'm just double checking here to make sure I've got the right settings. So password of class, we want to say login, and then we want logging synchronous, right? Very good to have that on your console line and your VTY line. So then we're going to say VTY 0 through 15. And we're going to say password is VTY class. We'll say login, although it's probably already there. And then logging synchronous. All right, so do we have the correct configurations? Do show run, pipe it to section line con. And again, as long as that line con I put in there is unique, it's going to work, right? I could say line con 0, but I can leave it at just line con for the console line. So does everything look good there? It does. What about my VTY lines? Line VTY, and there are the sections that deal with the VTY lines, and everything looks good there. Now, what we're going to do next is the message of the day. So we exit out and we're going to say banner MOTD, and we want to make sure this matches authorized access only, exclamation mark, violators will be prosecuted. And we'll end it right there. And we do actually get 4 percentage points for that. So make sure that everything matches up exactly on that banner message of the day. All right, so that has been taken care of. And now we're going to enable the SVI. And let me double check here. Yep, we're going to enable the SVI. So let's go into interface VLAN 1. Let's add the IP address. Add the IP address of 192.168.1.2. And again, this is a /24 with a 255.255.255.0 subnet mask. So now we're at 90%. But it wants us to ping over to the other switch. So let's say do ping 192.168.1.1. So can I ping the other switch? And what did we forget to do? Exactly, we forgot to say no shut on that switch virtual interface, which gives us another 5 points. Now if I rerun that ping command, we should see that we have connectivity in there. It took a couple ARP packets. Or I should say it took an ARP packet and then we dropped a couple packets and timeout. But now we have connectivity over to the other switch. So now let's save the configuration with either a copy running config startup config, and that puts us at 100%, or we could say write memory. Now, let me ask you, we're at 100%, but what are some of the things we didn't do that maybe we should have done? So if I say show run, if someone's looking over my shoulder right now, would we possibly have an issue here? Well, sure. If their PC's connected to VLAN 1, they can see the VTY password in clear text. So super simple for them to handle. How could we fix that? Well, we could go into global config and say service password encryption. And now when I say do show run, if they're looking over my shoulder, that's going to be a little more difficult to remember than the plain text password. Now we've got ciphertext. So give some consideration to some of the other commands that we've run, reflect on some of the settings that we applied in previous packet tracer activities and think about whether those are going to add value to your configuration. All right, well, we are at 100%, and that is going to wrap up skills activity number 1, where we did some initial configuration, and in fact, we erased the initial configuration, and then we added some passwords and a switch virtual interface. We also went off on a tangent on real Cisco hardware to see the real true value of that logging synchronous command when applied to the console lines, and if you were connected remotely via the VTY lines, you would see some value add there. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.